Goldstein, CPA in Alexandria, Virginia. He's an executive recruiter with tons of experience. Nice to meet you, Mark. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Wish it was a little less rainy out there.
It's kind of nasty out today, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some alternative career paths someone with an accounting degree could get into besides tax and audit?
Well, I think that's a great question. So I think that if you find yourself getting into public accounting, putting in some time, and realizing that it's not for you, whether it's because of the hours or because you would rather be in more of an internal role. There's a number of different paths that you can go. Obviously, I think the most tried and true path is the public to industry pipeline is what I would typically call it. So those would be somebody who started off in audit, did a couple of years, and then moved to a company and got into a financial reporting or a technical accounting type role. I think that's typically a pretty easy transition.
Like going into the Big Four or what have you?
Yeah. Either that or going into a corporate tax role if your background is more on the tax side. I think there's typically a lot of demand for people who come from public accounting backgrounds who transition into those types of roles. If you don't start in public, it can be a little bit more challenging, but I think typically that the way forward would generally be to start on a general ledger team as a staff accountant with the company. So typically, when you're in a role like that, you're at the beginning, you're involved in helping to manage the month-end close, managing reconciliations, managing accruals, and largely working, I'd say, more on the operational side of the business. So it tends to be a little bit less gap heavy and a little bit more focused on the day-to-day of running an organization. So I think those tend to be the more tried and true paths. What I've seen other people do is maybe they decide audit's not for them, corporate accounting's not for them, but they really enjoy maybe the IT side of accounting. So then what I've seen people do is move into become more of a technical specialist or an implementation consultant type role. So in that type of position, typically what you're doing is you're working with organizations and clients in order to help them, implement new solutions to make their accounting processes running more efficiently. So that might be implementing new ERPs, integrating different systems with your ERP, finding ways to reduce, the amount of manual processes that you're doing. And so people who tend to be very process oriented, very focused on continuous improvement tend to thrive very well in that type of position. Or you can do what I did and go into a completely different field entirely. So as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm both an executive recruiter and a CPA. I worked in the accounting field for about a decade before deciding that I wanted to do something a little bit different with my life, and I transitioned into my current field. And I think this is a really good field for somebody who enjoys accounting, has a strong background in accounting, but doesn't necessarily want to do accounting on a day-to-day basis. It's a very sales-oriented role, and it's a role where you're spending your entire day talking to people, building relationships, and helping organizations solve their human capital problems. So, with an accounting degree, there's a lot of different paths you can go aside from your typical audit or tax.
What transferable skills might someone who's an accountant be able to parlay into a field like recruiting or a different field?
So I think one of the good things about accounting is it's often referred to as the language of business. And what I mean by that is in an accounting department, you are working with people from every facet of your organization. You're working with legal, you're working with the department heads of different areas of your organization. You're working with the CFO, you're working with VPs. So you learn a lot about how a business operates and about how they're generating revenue, about how they manage their expenses. So there's a lot of different transferable skills that you tend to pick up over the years. I think as far as recruiting specifically, what really kind of transferred to me is number one, being able to have those high level conversations with hiring managers about what their needs are. Just to give an example, this morning I talked to a local hiring manager here in the DMV who was looking to add a technical accounting expert to their team. And the thing about that is, there are a number of recruiters out there who might have this conversation and they're not going to know necessarily what a technical accountant is compared to, for example, a general ledger accountant. But they're two very, very different skills. One's very focused on GAAP, on compliance, on high-level transactions for the organization. And as I alluded to, general ledger accounting is going to be a lot more focused on the day-to-day. So somebody who comes into the recruiting field with an accounting background and an accounting degree, they're going to know that distinction. But somebody who did not come in with this background, they're going to have to do a little bit more homework there. So I think that's one area that's very transferable. The other area is your network. I think a good example for me, and I was telling you a little bit about this before we got on camera, is that my accounting background was primarily in the not-for-profit space, and I had a large network in that space. So when I transferred into the recruiting field, I was able to leverage a lot of that network in order to bring in business for my organization, in order to network more effectively, and in order to sort of carve out a niche for myself in the industry that I came from, which right there, that's a pretty significant transferable skill. Outside of recruiting, I think there are a lot of skills. I think the technical skills you pick up are very invaluable. In order to understand how an accounting system works, you intuitively learn a lot about databases and about how transactions feed from one system to another. And I think a lot of that knowledge and skill does translate very well. I've also seen a few people, in particular with tax backgrounds, who might decide after a few years that they want to go to law school and they want to leverage their knowledge at a bit of a higher level as an attorney. So those are just a few different examples of how your accounting knowledge and expertise can be transferable into other fields.
And that might be why the CPA exam is changing. Now they have a module where you're more specialized. Mm-hmm. I think that replaced BEC. So that's good. I mean, there's more than just like doing taxes or audit, as you said.
Exactly.
So why should somebody pursue a career in accounting in the first place? Why not go into nursing or computer science or engineering?
I think a big part of it, number one, is job security. When it comes, I know you've essentially created the series to counteract the shortage of talent in the accounting field. And the fact of the matter is that if you have an accounting degree, if you have a CPA, you are going to have no problem finding employment. And that is, I think, regardless of the market. When it comes to IT or engineering, for example, what we've started to see, I mean, there was a small market downturn last year, and there were a ton of layoffs in the IT field. A lot of the people who were impacted were people with engineering backgrounds. In accounting, it's a little, I don't want to say it's completely impervious to market factors, but it is less dependent on them. Because a lot of your accounting hiring needs, they're driven by regulatory needs. Regardless of what's happening in the market, organizations are always going to need to get their tax returns out on time. They're always going to need to close the books. They're always going to need to be able to manage their audit. So, from all of those perspectives, you're going to be in a pretty, solid place from a career perspective. I think one of the other selling points of accounting is that compared to other fields, there is a lot of potential for remote work if that's something that you enjoy. I think I actually saw an article, I forgot if it was put out by like Forbes or Business Insider or one of those recently, but it was it actually put out that accounting has more remote and hybrid openings than pretty much any other field.
Wow, that's a great aspect. I mean, a perk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was even before the pandemic. I mean, I remember one of my last financial reporting manager roles before I made this transition. Even pre-pandemic, they basically let us work remotely as much as we needed to.
So you have a less traditional background. You're an accountant turned executive recruiter. So what does an executive recruiter actually do? I mean, maybe you can talk about a typical day for you.
Well, I don't think there is exactly what I would call a typical day. Every day is different. But to give a high-level overview of what we do, essentially the way that I like to view us is as talent partners to the organizations that we work with. So I think a lot of companies, a lot of hiring managers, they struggle to hire accounting and finance talent because it's very specialized. It tends to be very industry specific, and generally organizations, even if they have their own HR teams or talent acquisition teams that focus on recruiting for their organizations, they struggle to bring accounting talent into the door. And that's where firms like mine come in. So a large aspect of my job is essentially sales. There's kind of no way around it. It's building relationships with various hiring managers, so CFOs, controllers, FP&A directors, and
so a lot of phone calls, emails.
Yeah, a lot of phone calls, and talking to them about their organizations, their needs, their pain points, and learning what the human capital needs that they anticipate needing for their organizations. The second part of my job is working directly with candidates. So that involves what we call sourcing, which is essentially going to all the different resources that we have to work with, LinkedIn, Indeed, our personal networks, our databases, and both actively searching for the open roles that we're working with, as well as what we call pipelining, which is building relationships with candidates who have in-demand skills that we might be able to place somewhere in the future. So part of my job is responding to the immediate needs in the market, and part of my job is anticipating what the market's going to need in the future, and working to essentially be that matchmaker between the hiring managers that we partner with and the talent that we partner with.
So with all these different accountants that you work with, is there a common personality type that you've identified?
Uh, I don't think there's one personality type that I would look at and say, okay, this person is, set to be an accountant. I think there's a stereotype that accountants are, very introverted. I'm sure you've seen, the movie The Producers. I think a lot of people think of, like Gene Wilder's character in that movie as sort of the, our typical accountant. But I don't think that's the case. I think that depending on where you take your career in accounting, certain personality types tend to gravitate to those areas. For example, I think people in public accounting tend to be a little bit more extroverted. And I think that's kind of by necessity, right? Because they're client-facing roles, you're constantly going on site to different organizations, talking to CFOs, talking to controllers, and requesting information for them, as well as very often not giving them news that that they want to hear. So you need to have a little bit of tact. You need to have people-facing skills, and as you grow in your accounting career, especially as you become a director, a partner, a large part of your job is essentially sales and business development. So I think in public accounting, you tend to find people who are, more extroverted, more comfortable, being client-facing around people, and, also people who are a little bit more type A, because you need to be able to work the long hours that public accounting entails. I think on the corporate side of accounting, you tend to see people who are, maybe a little bit more introverted, but I mean, once again, that's not, true across the board. I've met people who are very extroverted, who are in this field. And I've also met people who, probably never leave their houses. It's a very wide and, diverse, spectrum. And then I think there's also room for people who are both big picture oriented versus detail oriented. What I mean by that is I've been in a few different accounting roles myself. I've been, I think where I've largely kind of thrived is roles that are focused on financial reporting and technical accounting. So those are roles where I'm very focused on sort of broad policy of the organizations, helping them to implement new accounting standards, working to build the financial reports that are going to the executive team of the organization. And those types of roles require a big picture focus. Being able to look at all the data and say, okay, how are we going to categorize this? How are we going to treat these broad scale transactions, these mergers, these new accounting standards? And I think people who are, very big picture focused tend to do well in those positions. And then there's also roles that I think are very detail focused. And as I've, been a controller, I've had to, kind of sit in that seat before. And, personally for me, I found that I really struggled on the detail side of things. I like to focus on, the reports, the information, the data, how are we going to present it. But, I don't necessarily love digging into a bunch of, invoices and making sure that every single transaction's coded correctly, or making sure that this, accrual is, booked correctly. And I think there are some people who are very good at that side of the equation. People who are very good at keeping things on task, making sure that the book's closed on time, digging into a specific account and identifying the anomalies. And I think there's honestly a need for all of these different personality types in accounting. So I don't think there's one type of person who I would say tends to thrive best as an accountant.
That's great that there's no cookie cutter format of an accountant.
Yeah, I mean, I think the common denominator, in all these fields is you need to be somebody who is Definitely I think you need to be intelligent. You need to be able to look at a set of data and see when something stands out or when something doesn't look right. But I would say that those are really the only things that I think all accountants have in common.
What do you see the future of accounting and tax? What do you think is the trend?
So I think we are going to see a very wide trend towards automation in the industry. And what I mean by that is automation more on the transaction side of the equation. So right now, there are still a good amount of companies who are doing a lot of things by hand. They're still processing every one of their single AP invoices by hand, printing them out, having a manager sign off on them. And I think we're ultimately going to be seeing a lot less of that. I think we're going to be seeing AI tools come in and they're going to be automating a lot of that process. I think we're going to be seeing a lot less manual work. And I think part of that's driven by necessity, and part of that's driven by what technology has been able to accomplish in especially these last few years with AI. So where I think the accounting field is going is we're going a lot more towards people who aren't just sitting there doing data entry, putting transactions into the system. I think that it's going to become a much more analytical field. It's going to be the people who are going to thrive are the ones who are able to understand the new technologies and systems that are coming up in the field, and who are able to work, adapt, and to really help organizations along this trend towards automation.
Could you tell us a little bit about the pay and the hours? Do you think accountants are treated fairly or unfairly?
That's a very loaded question.
Okay.
I think when it comes to treatment, but part of the issue, especially if you're in an internal accounting team, is that you're not a revenue generator for the organization. You're a cost center for them. And some organizations, they're going to look at their accounting team and they're going to see the value that they're bringing. They're going to see the value that they're bringing to the management team and helping them make key decisions. They're going to see the value that the accountant's giving in terms of making sure that they're compliant with their regulators. And I think that there are other organizations that look at accountants and just say, okay, I want somebody who can keep the books, but I don't really care what they're doing or how. And I've kind of seen the full spectrum throughout my career. I think there's been a lot of organizations where the team's invested in and it's treated well and they're developed. But it really is dependent on the management and their understanding of the value that the accounting team brings. In public accounting, in public you're a revenue generator, and typically you're held to a fairly high standard. You have targets of billable hours that you have to hit. You have performance standards that you're required to meet. You're going to have regular check-ins with the managers and the partners to make sure that you're adding value to the team. And I think that if you work for a good management team, if you work for a good partner, they're going to make you feel appreciated. They're going to make sure that they're doing what they can to develop your career and to help you grow and to not burn out. but there are always organizations that might just look at you as a number. But I don't think that's unique to accounting. I think that that can be said for
any
a number
job,
of
any company.
any job, any company.
That makes sense.
And then you had also touched on compensation. So that is a very hot topic in the accounting field. There was a study that was done by the Center for Audit Quality last year. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
But it's primarily about what is deterring young people from going into accounting and to studying in accounting. I think it's very informative because pay is one of the big areas that it touches on, and in particular entry-level salaries. And something that's spoken to is that the entry-level salaries for a 4-year accountant without a CPA, I think nationwide it's kind of hovered around somewhere between 55 to 57K, whereas somebody who graduates with a degree in information technology or computer science, they are able to start maybe in the mid 70s or at the very least like the low to mid 60s. So the salaries have sort of remained stagnant from an entry-level standpoint, but I would say that it's one of the careers that also offers some of the highest salary growth. But in order to get to that growth, typically you are required to take a few extra steps. That 4-year degree might not be enough. You might have to take master's program or some extra coursework to get to your 150. You're going to have to, sit for the CPA exam. And, none of that is, an easy task. It's something that most people accomplish while they're working full-time jobs. And, I'd say sort of in, best case scenario, if you're taking, one section every 3-4 months, it's going to take you about 10 months to a year to finish the exam if you pass each section on the first try.
Which was not the case for me.
So, but obviously getting that CPA is going to improve your salary prospects considerably. And I think as you step into roles that tend to be more high level and analytical in the accounting field, the compensation becomes pretty phenomenal. I mean, I'd say, it's not rare for somebody after 5-6 years in accounting with the CPA to be earning 6 figures or above.
Oh wow, that's great. Mm-hmm. That's a selling point right there. When you were in high school and even freshman, sophomore in college, did you know that you wanted to be an accountant?
No.
Okay.
So in high school, I kind of bounced around, a few different, potential career paths. I was actually very into film production at one point, and my dream job was to be like a Hollywood director or something. Obviously, that didn't happen. But as I took a couple of business courses when I was in high school, and that sort of interested me in majoring, something in the College of Business. I started out as a marketing major, believe it or not. And what happened is when I took my, entry-level accounting courses, I think it was my freshman or sophomore year, I was at the top of my class, and my professor essentially convinced me to switch my major into accounting. So that was what happened there.
I've heard, don't necessarily follow your passion, follow what you're good at, because it's fun to be good at stuff.
Yeah, and it was something that I realized I had an aptitude for, and it was also just something that I knew that I would have that stability when I got into it. So my sophomore year, I actually got an internship with the federal government as an auditor. I was with the Defense Contract Audit Agency. And then, after I graduated, I worked with them full time for a few years. But I think between the coursework and the internship, I realized that it was a career where I had a lot of growth potential and where I had strong aptitude. So,
how many computer monitors do you use?
I'd say typically I've got 2 monitors or so open at once, but I think that can kind of be a double-edged sword, because the more monitors I have up, the more tabs I have open, and it always just becomes a big mess. But typically I would say both in accounting and recruiting, it's useful to have multiple monitors, because you're typically you have multiple things you're trying to compare at one time. It's good to be able to have your invoice on one end and your spreadsheet on the other end, to be able to kind of compare it side by side.
And how good are you at Microsoft Excel?
So I know for one of my jobs I had to take an advanced Excel assessment, and I got like a 98% on it.
Ooh, good for you.
But yeah, I think having an aptitude for Excel is key in any accounting role. Just knowing how to not just do simple formulas and pivot tables and stuff like that, but knowing how to do some of that higher level stuff, knowing how to do conditional formatting and macros and VLOOKUPs, HLOOKUPs, sum ifs, knowing how to really kind of get the most you can out of Excel is going to add a lot of value to your organization. It's also going to make your job easier. I can't tell you how many times, especially earlier in my career, I'd have a colleague who might, have had a couple of, decades on me, didn't necessarily have that Excel education in school, and they'll come to me with, some spreadsheet problem, and they'll show me, the way I've been doing it is I've been going cell by cell, and I'm
painful.
Yeah. And then I show them how they can do the exact same thing in 2 seconds with a formula and a drag and drop,
That feels good, right? when you can automate something like that and save hours.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'd say Excel skills are paramount in any accounting role.
So you've helped all these people find jobs, and you've got all this experience in the accounting field. What advice would you give somebody? Maybe they aren't in the right field and they're trying to find a new one, or any other career advice you might give to somebody.
So
about maybe finding their place.
I think taking an aptitude test is something that I might recommend to really kind of hone in on what your strengths are. As I kind of alluded to before, there are some people who I think tend to be, very extroverted, very, very motivated by talking to people, having conversations. But, there are a lot of people who are, very introverted. And, you don't want to be in a job that is, drains you emotionally. Really know what your personality type is, and then also really kind of what your strengths and interests are in accounting. If when you're taking your accounting coursework in school, you realize that you hate your tax classes, you might not want to apply for the the tax track over at Deloitte.
So it's common sense, right?
Yeah. I'd say a lot of it's common sense. But I think when you're earlier in your career, it's also easier to try different things. If a lot of public accounting firms now are offering rotational programs. I believe it's either Deloitte or KPMG that I know. They've got one going on right now, where they'll let you try out a bunch of different things. So they might give you 6 months in audit, 6 months in tax, 6 months in accounting advisory, and from there you can kind of get an idea of which area you enjoy a little bit more. And yeah, I think when you're early career, that's the time to do that. I will kind of caution you that, if you're getting a little bit further on in your career and you are still doing that, like every, 9 months to a year, you're in a completely different, line of work, that doesn't always reflect the best on you. And, it might make it harder for you to get interviews in the future. So I'd say, typically first 5 years, that's your time to really discover what your passion is in the field. And then I'd say by, year 6 is when you should start kind of settling on a path.
Did you have anything else you would like to add?
I'd say, really kind of the last thing that, I would say is that, regardless of the changes that we're seeing in the industry, regardless of automation, regardless of this accounting shortage that we're seeing, the demand for accountants isn't going to be going anywhere. If you're a young person who's looking to, find their career path, you want a career that's going to offer you high salary growth, it's going to offer you remote flexibility, it's going to offer you stability. Accounting is still a great field to go into, and it's definitely something that I would recommend for anybody who has the aptitude for it.
Mark, I'm just blown away. You are just a fountain of knowledge, and I know for one that next time I'm career searching or job searching, I'm definitely going to give you a call if that's okay.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure. Bye.